know this feeling. The world keeps pressing on you, waiting for you to snap. A colleague provokes you in front of others, hoping to see your temper flare. A partner throws old wounds in your face, daring you to fight back. Even strangers on the road cut you off, just to steal a reaction. And when you finally lose it, they smirk. They got what they wanted. They pulled you into chaos. But what if you refused to play that game? What if, instead of exploding, you became something far more terrifying? A force that no insult, no betrayal, no attack could disturb. Not the monster of rage they expected, but the monster of calm power. This is where Stoicism enters your story. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, they weren't men of weakness. They were men who understood that true strength is found in self-mastery, that your enemy cannot chain what lives inside you unless you hand them the key. And so the question becomes, when the world demands a monster, will you give them the one they want or the one they fear the most? The you who cannot be broken. This journey is about building that unshakable calm. Part 1. When the world dares you to break. The truth is, life will never stop testing you. The moment you begin to steady yourself, someone, at work, at home, even in passing, will try to rattle your calm. A colleague interrupts you in a meeting with a subtle insult, hoping to undermine your confidence. A family member drags you back into old arguments, baiting you into anger. Even the small frictions, traffic jams, bills piling up, deadlines closing in, whisper in your ear. Lose it. Break down. Show weakness. Society is built on these subtle battles for reaction. People want to see you stumble because your fall justifies their own instability. This is the crucible that Stoicism prepares you for. Epictetus reminded us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react that matters. The provocations of life are inevitable. The trap is believing you must react the way they want you to. What Stoicism whispers is far more radical, that you always have a choice. You may not control the insult hurled at you, the loss that shakes you, or the injustice that corners you. But you control the space between stimulus and response. In that pause lies your strength, and in that strength lies your freedom. Modern psychology confirms what Epictetus taught centuries ago. By the time you reach your mid-30s or 40s, you are juggling multiple arenas at once: career advancement or stagnation, family obligations, financial pressure, health concerns. Under this weight, society almost expects you to be brittle. Colleagues anticipate the stressed executive snapping during a presentation. Children brace for the parent's temper after a long day. Even friends sometimes test boundaries, knowing that your patience is thinner than it used to be. What is common is the loss of control. What is uncommon and powerful is refusing to give it away. History offers a striking example in Harriet Tubman. Born into slavery, hunted like an animal when she escaped, she lived in a world that desperately wanted her to collapse in fear. Slave catchers, dogs, armed men, everything around her whispered, "Quit, panic, turn back." Yet she became something unthinkable. She did not roar with rage or shiver with terror. She hardened into unshakable courage, guiding not just herself, but hundreds of others into freedom through the Underground Railroad. To her pursuers, she was the monster they feared most. A woman who would not break. Her silence in the woods, her steady resolve through the night, her refusal to surrender to panic. This terrified the oppressors more than any sword could. And you face the same dynamic. Even if your battlefield looks different, your hunters might be the pressure of bills, the disapproval of a boss, the criticism of relatives who never think you're enough. They want you to explode, to prove them right. But just like Tubman, your greatest power emerges not when you lash out, but when you stand unshaken. Every moment of provocation is not just a test, it is an invitation. It is the chance to prove, to yourself most of all, that your calm cannot be stolen. So the next time the world corners you, pause. When anger claws at your chest, when fear whispers in your ear, remember, they want a monster. Don't give them the monster of rage. Give them the monster of calm, of discipline, of clarity. That is what frightens them most, because it cannot be controlled, cannot be broken, cannot be owned. That is when you begin to live as a Stoic, not by denying the world's cruelty, but by refusing to let it write your reactions. In those moments of tension, you are no longer the victim of circumstance. You are the author of your own strength. Part 2. The power hidden in stillness. Picture this. You're in a heated meeting. Your boss criticizes you unfairly in front of the entire team, their words sharp and humiliating. Everyone turns towards you, waiting for the explosion, the angry rebuttal, the defensive justifications. That's the script the world knows. That's what they're prepared for. But imagine, instead, you remain still. You don't fidget. You don't fire back. You don't collapse into apology. You simply breathe, look steady, and let the storm crash around you without being swept away. Suddenly, the power in the room shifts. Everyone senses it. Your calm unsettles them more than anger ever could. Marcus Aurelius captured this truth perfectly. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He ruled an empire drowning in chaos, wars at the borders, plagues at home, betrayals in his court. If anyone had reason to raise his voice or break under the weight, it was him. Yet his journal, his meditations, reveals a man who turned constantly inward to find stillness. To Marcus, the battlefield wasn't the Germanic frontier or the Senate. It was his own mind. The ability to remain composed when others raged was the mark of true mastery. Modern psychology echoes his wisdom. Neuroscience tells us that when you meet conflict with shouting or panic, your cortisol levels spike, your judgment narrows, and your body stays in fight or flight mode far longer than the situation requires. But when you embrace stillness, when you control your breath, slow your heart rate, and ground yourself, you literally change your brain chemistry. Cortisol drops, decision-making sharpens, and you project authority without ever raising your voice. This isn't weakness. This is biological power. The one who stays calm thinks clearer, sees farther, and influences more. Think of it in the context of family. A parent loses their temper and yells at their child. What happens? The child shuts down or lashes back. Fear may win in the short term, but trust erodes. Contrast that with the parent who, in the face of defiance, pauses and speaks slowly, firmly, without anger. The child senses something deeper, a strength that does not need volume to be felt. That silence holds weight. It commands respect not by intimidation, but by presence. Or imagine the workplace again. The employee who reacts defensively to criticism gives away their power. The manager who answers calmly, even when provoked, leaves others guessing. When you respond with stillness, you become unpredictable. People can't manipulate you because their usual tactics, shame, anger, pressure, fall useless at your feet. In fact, they begin to fear your silence more than they would fear your shouting, because silence reveals that you are operating from a place they cannot reach or control. The lesson is clear. Your stillness is not passive. It is not withdrawal. It is an act of defiance against a world that feeds on reaction. When you are still, you are not surrendering. You are seizing the high ground. You are telling life itself, I am not your puppet. My strings are cut. So practice this in the small moments. The next time your child tests your patience, or your boss speaks harshly, or your spouse pushes your buttons, pause. Let the silence hang. In that pause, breathe deeply. Watch the shift. The power that others thought they had over you dissolves, and a new kind of respect takes root. This is the Stoic mindset in motion. But what happens when calmness is not enough? When pain itself becomes your teacher? That's where the next lesson begins. Remember, the one who controls themselves in the storm holds the greatest strength of all. Part 3. How pain becomes your forge. Pain is the teacher you never asked for, but the one you cannot ignore. It comes uninvited through betrayal, illness, loss, or disappointment, and your first instinct is to resist, to curse it, to wish it away. Yet the Stoics insisted on something radical, that pain, far from being a curse, can be the very forge where your strength is made. Seneca put it bluntly, fire tests gold, adversity tests brave men. Gold cannot shine until it survives the flames. Neither can you. Think about the way life works in your 30s and 40s. You're expected to carry immense weight. The responsibility of a career, the stability of a family, the crushing pressure of financial commitments. And just when you think you're holding it all together, life strikes. An illness in the family, a failed promotion, a partner's betrayal. These blows hurt because they target what you value most, but hidden within them is the raw material of growth, the invitation to become unbreakable. Modern psychology has a name for this: post-traumatic growth. Studies show that many people who endure intense suffering emerge not broken, but stronger, more purposeful, and more compassionate. Instead of being crushed, they develop new meaning. Pain expands their capacity to endure. And sometimes, it even sparks creativity and leadership. You've likely seen it yourself. Friends who, after a devastating loss, dedicate their lives to causes bigger than themselves. Colleagues who, after a failure, rebuild with greater wisdom and focus. Pain doesn't have to end you. It can sculpt you. Few lives illustrate this more vividly than that of Frida Kahlo. From childhood, she was struck by polio. At 18, a bus accident shattered her spine and pelvis, leaving her in pain that would never leave. Most people would have given up, resigned themselves to quiet despair. But Frida took her agony and transformed it into art. Her paintings, haunting and surreal, spoke the language of pain, yet also the language of resilience. She turned her suffering into symbols that inspired millions, declaring through her work that pain might wound the body, but could never silence the soul. She became, in her own way, a monster of resilience, unyielding in the face of what others thought unbearable. When you look at Frida's story, it reframes your own. Your struggles may not take the shape of shattered bones or lifelong illness, but they are real. Financial stress, emotional heartbreak, the silent weight of unmet expectations. The Stoic path does not deny the sting of these wounds. Instead, it asks, what will you do with them? Will you let them consume you? Or will you treat them as fire that tempers you? The power lies in your response. Every ache, every disappointment, every scar is a chance to decide that you will not be defined by what hurts you. Pain is not the end of your story. It is the dark ink that makes your strength visible. So, the next time you feel yourself crushed by adversity, remember Seneca's words. You are gold in the fire. Each trial is a test, not of whether you will suffer, that is guaranteed, but of whether you will rise through it purified, stronger, more unshakable. That choice, that transformation, is always yours. Pain doesn't destroy you. It reveals the power you didn't know you had. Part 4. The courage to say no. There are moments when the hardest, most frightening word you can say is also the smallest. No. The world doesn't always want your silence to be calm. It often wants it to be compliance. It wants you to go along, to accept what you know is wrong, to keep your head down and not make waves. But Stoicism teaches that real freedom doesn't come from fitting in or pleasing others. It comes from mastery of yourself, your values, your integrity, your willingness to stand where it is dangerous to stand. As Epictetus reminds you, no man is free who is not master of himself. Consider how this plays out in your own daily life. You're in your 30s or 40s with a career, maybe children, maybe a mortgage. You're asked to do things at work that compromise your ethics, to nod along with leadership decisions you know are unjust. Or you face constant pressure to conform to what friends, family, or society expects, even when it conflicts with your deeper principles. Perhaps in your marriage or relationships, you are asked to stay quiet when you know the truth must be spoken. Saying no in these situations feels risky. It threatens your comfort, your stability, your image. And yet, it is in these moments that the Stoic Monster awakens, not through violence or anger, but through resistance. One of the clearest examples of this spirit comes from Sophie Scholl, a young German student during World War II. Alongside her brother and a handful of friends in the White Rose Resistance, she printed and distributed leaflets exposing the lies of the Nazi regime. Everyone around her was silent, either out of fear or complicity. The expectation was that Sophie would remain silent too, that she would live quietly, safely, obediently. But she refused. She said no. For that courage, she was arrested, tried, and executed at just 21 years old. Her defiance made her dangerous, not because she carried weapons, but because she carried truth. Sophie Scholl was called a traitor by her enemies, but in reality, she was a monster of conscience, a young woman whose refusal to comply became a timeless act of moral strength. You may never face the life or death stakes Sophie did, but the principle is the same in your life. Saying no to gossip in the office when it's easier to join in. Saying no to family expectations that drain your spirit. Saying no to unethical demands at work, even if it costs you a promotion. Each small refusal builds the muscle of integrity, and while others may see your resistance as arrogance, stubbornness, or even hostility, what you are truly doing is protecting your freedom. Psychologists call this boundary setting, and it is one of the most critical aspects of mental health. When you consistently say yes to what violates your principles, you erode your self-worth. But when you risk disapproval to uphold your values, you strengthen not just your sense of self, but your inner calm. Boundaries, like Stoic discipline, are invisible shields. They don't make you unkind. They make you whole. Sophie Scholl's courage shows you that resistance is not about grand gestures. It is about the daily choice to live in truth rather than in fear. When you choose not to bend, when you risk standing alone, others may call you a monster. But this kind of monstrosity is sacred. It is the mark of a soul unwilling to be enslaved by lies. So, ask yourself, where in your life are you being asked to stay silent, to bow, to betray your principles? And what would happen if you simply said no? The cost may be real, but so is the reward. For every refusal to betray yourself is another step toward freedom. When you resist, you embody Stoicism at its sharpest edge. You discover that the true monster is not the one who rages or destroys, but the one who refuses to yield when all others have surrendered. That is not weakness. That is dignity. Part 5. The monster they cannot control. There's a reason why tyrants, manipulators, and even petty bosses fear certain people. It is not because those people shout the loudest or command armies. It is because they cannot be controlled. A Stoic knows that the greatest strength is not found in mastering others, but in mastering yourself. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Once you accept this truth, you become a force beyond manipulation, because nothing outside of you has authority over your soul." Think about how much of your stress comes from fear of losing things outside your control: your income, your reputation, the approval of others. Society thrives on this vulnerability. Marketing campaigns feed on it. Workplaces exploit it. Even families sometimes use it to bend you to their will. If you fear loss, you are easy to control. But what if you could stand firm in the knowledge that your true power lies only within your choices, your character, your integrity? Then suddenly, the levers of fear no longer work on you. You become unpredictable to those who seek to manipulate you, and that unpredictability makes you dangerous. Dietrich Bonhoeffer embodied this truth. A German pastor and theologian during the rise of Hitler, Bonhoeffer faced immense pressure to conform. Many religious leaders of his time chose silence, bowing to the Nazi regime in exchange for safety. But Bonhoeffer refused. He spoke against the persecution of Jews, he participated in the resistance, and ultimately, he was imprisoned. Even in prison, he remained composed, writing letters that reflected hope, clarity, and an unwavering moral compass. The regime tried to silence him, to break him with threats and isolation. But how do you break someone who has already surrendered the fear of death? Bonhoeffer's final act was not despair, but dignity. Executed just weeks before the collapse of the Nazi regime, he left behind the image of a man calm in the face of the gallows. To his captors, this calm was terrifying. They could control his body, but not his conscience. He was a monster of conscience, untouchable not because he was invincible, but because he had chosen to anchor his life in what could never be taken from him: his integrity. The lesson is sharp and deeply relevant to you today. In your career, Perhaps you feel pressure to compromise for the sake of advancement. In your family life, you may be pulled into conflicts that demand you abandon your peace for approval. Or in society, you might be told to remain silent about issues that matter to you, simply to avoid friction. If your sense of worth depends on others' reactions, you will always be vulnerable. But if you practice the Stoic discipline of detachment, reminding yourself that reputation, wealth, and even life itself are externals, you begin to discover an unshakable strength. Modern psychology echoes this in the concept of internal locus of control. People who believe their life outcomes depend primarily on their own actions and choices, not external forces, report higher resilience, greater life satisfaction, and less anxiety. When your center of gravity shifts inward, you stop being tossed by every external storm. Marcus Aurelius distinguished sharply between what belongs to you and what does not. The external, fame, fortune, health, even the opinions of others, are not yours to command. The internal, your judgments, your decisions, your virtue, are fully yours. Bonhoeffer lived this philosophy to its final breath, and you can live it daily, in quieter ways, by refusing to sell your peace for approval, by holding your integrity, even when it costs you comfort, by remembering that fear loses its grip once you accept that nothing essential can be stolen from you. When you reach this state, the world cannot bend you. It cannot predict you, manipulate you, or control you. That is when others begin to call you a monster, not because you are cruel or destructive, but because you are untouchable. And in truth, that is not monstrosity. That is freedom. Part 6. Surviving the impossible. What does it take to survive the impossible? Not just to endure, but to carry others with you through the storm? Seneca once said, "Adversity reveals the man." He meant that crisis doesn't just test you, it unmasks you. In calm waters, anyone can pretend to be strong. But when the ice cracks underfoot, when your world collapses in chaos, only then do you discover whether your composure is real or an illusion. Few stories capture this better than that of Ernest Shackleton, the legendary explorer whose Antarctic expedition turned into one of the greatest survival sagas in history. In 1914, Shackleton set out with his crew aboard the Endurance, determined to cross the frozen continent. But the Antarctic had other plans. The ship became trapped in sea ice, crushed slowly until it splintered into nothing. Shackleton and his men were stranded on the most hostile landscape on Earth, with no hope of rescue and no clear path to safety. Most leaders would have broken. Panic, despair, or tyranny might have overtaken the camp. But Shackleton embodied the very heart of Stoic resilience. He did not rant against fate. He did not collapse into despair. Instead, he remained calm, steady, even reassuring. He joked with his men. He managed rations with discipline. He organized impossible journeys across ice and sea. For nearly 2 years, his unshakable composure kept the crew alive. Not one man under his command perished. Shackleton became, in the truest sense, a monster of survival, a force of calm in a place designed to destroy human beings. Now think about your own life. You may not be stranded on Antarctic ice, but you face impossible situations of your own. A business on the verge of collapse, a family conflict that threatens to tear relationships apart, a diagnosis that shakes the foundation of your plans. In those moments, people around you, your colleagues, your children, your spouse, are looking to you just as Shackleton's crew looked to him. They are waiting to see whether you will break or whether you will steady the ship. Modern psychology tells us something remarkable. In crises, human beings engage in emotional contagion. The mood and energy of one person can spread to the group like fire. If you panic, others will panic. But if you project calm, you gift others a chance at stability. Neuroscience backs this up. Mirror neurons in the brain respond to the emotions of those around us, syncing our states with theirs. That means your composure is never just for you. It is the oxygen mask that helps others breathe in the storm. Shackleton's story is extraordinary, but the principle is universal. As a manager, when your team faces layoffs or crushing deadlines, your calm presence can be the difference between collapse and collective grit. As a parent, when your child is afraid, your measured reassurance becomes the anchor they cling to. As a partner, when life throws uncertainty at both of you, your unshakable calm can make the difference between despair and unity. This is why Stoicism calls you to practice composure every day, even in small matters. If you can remain steady in traffic, in arguments, in financial stress, then when the impossible comes, and it always does, you will already be trained. You will not need to invent strength in the moment. It will already live in you. Shackleton did not save his crew by luck. He saved them because he was already a man of discipline, patience, and resilience before the ice closed in. He had prepared for chaos by mastering himself long before chaos arrived. That is the lesson for you. Don't wait for the storm to build your calm. Build it now, in the small storms of daily life. The world admires loud power, but the kind of power that endures, the kind that survives the impossible, is quieter. It is the leader who does not panic, the parent who does not collapse, the individual who, when surrounded by fear, refuses to surrender. That calm is not weakness, it is command. And when you stand unshaken in the face of what should have destroyed you, people will call you a monster. Not because you have claws or fangs, but because you have done what seemed impossible. You endured, you led, you survived. And in survival, you became something the storm itself could not overcome. Part 7. Freedom through discipline. At first, it sounds like a paradox. How can discipline, the strict control of your actions, be the key to freedom? Shouldn't freedom mean doing whatever you want, whenever you want? But the Stoics argued the opposite. Epictetus put it bluntly: no man is free who is not master of himself. If you cannot control your desires, your impulses, your habits, then you are not free. You are enslaved, not by chains or by governments, but by your own untrained mind. Think about how often your day is dictated by forces inside you. The craving for sugar pushes you to eat what you regret. The impulse to check your phone pulls you from meaningful work. The surge of anger makes you say words that wound. These are not free choices. These are reflexes, conditioned loops that hijack your life. Psychology calls this the habit loop. A cue triggers craving. Craving drives action. Action rewards the craving, and the cycle deepens. Unless you intervene with awareness and discipline, you live as a puppet pulled by invisible strings. This is why the Stoics treated discipline not as punishment, but as liberation. Seneca wrote, "Most powerful is he who has himself in his own power." To the Stoic, Discipline is not about restriction. It is about sovereignty. It means you govern your own inner state, rather than letting it be governed by appetite, fear, or anger. Just as a skilled rider trains a wild horse, you learn to direct your mind instead of being dragged by it. No figure embodies this truth more vividly than Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary Japanese swordsman. Musashi was undefeated in over 60 duels, but his true strength was not merely in his blade. He lived by a code of relentless self-discipline. In his Book of 5 Rings, Musashi warned against attachment, luxury, or distraction. He trained not just his sword hand, but his entire being, practicing simplicity, clarity, and restraint. He ate little, lived sparsely, and focused on mastery. To Musashi, the real enemy was never the opponent in front of him. It was the temptation within to become careless, indulgent, or arrogant. And here's the striking overlap. Modern psychology confirms Musashi's wisdom. Self-regulation, the ability to delay gratification, to resist impulses, to align your actions with long-term goals, is one of the strongest predictors of success in life. Studies of willpower show that those who cultivate disciplined habits are not just more productive, but happier. Why? Because they are not constantly at the mercy of cravings or regrets. They have created order inside themselves, and that inner order translates into outer freedom. Imagine two versions of yourself. In the first, you wake up and immediately reach for your phone. You scroll, you waste half an hour, and then rush through the morning already behind. In the second, you wake up, sit for a few minutes of silence, review your priorities, and begin the day with intention. Which version is free? The one who does whatever he wants, or the one who chose deliberately, who directed his actions rather than drifting? The answer is obvious. Freedom is not the absence of discipline. Freedom is the product of discipline. This truth is uncomfortable because it means freedom costs something. It costs you the indulgence of your impulses. It costs you the easy pleasure of distraction. But what you gain in return is priceless: command of yourself. And when you have that, no external force, no boss, no political system, no crisis can truly enslave you. You may be confined to a prison, like Epictetus once was, or to hardship, like Musashi endured, yet still remain free, because freedom is an inner condition. So the lesson is clear. If you want to live as a Stoic monster, untouchable by chaos, you must forge discipline into your daily life. Train yourself to pause before reacting, to choose long-term strength over short-term comfort, to hold yourself accountable when no one else is watching. Each small act of discipline is a declaration. I am not a slave to impulse. I am free. And when others look at you, they will sense it. They will see a person who does not flinch under temptation, who does not collapse under stress, who lives on his own terms. That presence is magnetic, even intimidating, because most people remain prisoners of themselves. You, by contrast, have become the rarest of all beings, a free person. Part 8. The Calm Storm. When you picture a storm, you imagine thunder cracking the sky, winds tearing roofs apart, waves crashing against the shore with deafening force. But the most powerful storms do not need noise to assert their strength. A hurricane pulls entire cities to their knees, and yet the calm eye at its center remains still. That paradox, the silence within unstoppable force, is the essence of Stoic power. Marcus Aurelius captured this idea when he wrote, "Be like the rock against which the waves crash and then break upon it." He was reminding himself, as emperor, that the world would hurl its chaos at him. Anger from senators, betrayal from friends, wars at the borders. Yet, his strength did not come from shouting back at the storm. It came from being the rock, unshaken, unmoved, calm even as everything else roared around him. Modern psychology would describe this as emotional regulation, the ability to remain grounded when emotions rise. Cortisol, the stress hormone, surges when you face pressure. Most people react with agitation, raised voices, frantic decisions, impulsive actions. But the Stoic calm storm does the opposite. By slowing your breath, by grounding your mind in the present, you lower stress responses, sharpen clarity, and make decisions that outlast the storm. To outside eyes, this is unnerving. Because when others expect panic and you respond with composure, you suddenly appear larger, almost otherworldly, as though you have tapped into a power they cannot reach. History gives us luminous examples of this. Take Victor Hugo, the great French writer. For years, he was cast into political exile, forced away from his homeland for daring to speak against tyranny. His enemies expected his silence to be defeat, his isolation to be punishment. But Hugo turned exile into strength. In the quiet of his banishment, he wrote Les Miserables, a book that became thunder without shouting, a storm without sound, shaking the moral conscience of Europe. He could have chosen bitterness, anger, or despair. Instead, like the rock Marcus spoke of, he endured the waves of politics, and in his stillness, created something that outlasted all of them. And if you look closer, you see the same pattern in your own life. When your boss pressures you in front of colleagues, expecting you to lose composure. When your child screams for attention, expecting you to snap. When a rival at work provokes you, expecting anger, your calmness is not weakness. It is the storm they cannot contain. Like Hugo, like Marcus, you resist the noise, and by doing so, you reveal who truly holds the power in that moment. Think of how unsettling this is for those around you. Anger feeds on anger. Conflict escalates when both sides shout. But when you refuse to raise your voice, when you meet rage with steady eyes and a measured tone, you deny them the fuel they crave. You become the calm storm, so quiet, yet so commanding, that the other side eventually exhausts itself against you. This is why silence is not passivity. It is not retreat. It is strategy. It is power. The Stoics were not asking you to mute yourself forever, but to learn when stillness is more devastating than noise. For there are times when a single calm presence can shift an entire room. Times when a steady refusal to panic can save lives. Times when silence, chosen with strength, carries more authority than 100 shouted words. Your life will give you storms. At work, at home, in your own restless mind. But the Stoic path shows you that you don't need to be louder than the storm. You need to become the calm within it. Just as Hugo's words outlived his exile, just as Marcus's wisdom still guides us 2 millennia later, you can transform stillness into an energy so vast it shapes the course of events long after the noise has faded. That is the calm storm, the presence that cannot be broken, the silence that changes history. Part 9. building your Stoic monster within. You've walked with Marcus, with Seneca, with Epictetus, and with the men and women of history who turned suffering into strength. But philosophy means little if it stays on the page. To become what others might call a monster, a force unbending, unshaken, unafraid, you must bring Stoicism from thought into action. The real battlefield isn't in books. It is in your mornings, your conversations, your daily choices. And it begins not with grand gestures, but with micro habits so simple that they slowly rewire your mind, like drops of water hollowing a stone. The first is journaling. Each morning, before the noise of the world floods your head, ask one question. What lies within my control today? Marcus Aurelius did the same in his meditations. He reminded himself that insults, setbacks, and even death were outside his command, but his choices, his thoughts, his actions were always his own. Modern psychology affirms this. When you clarify what is within your control, you reduce anxiety and sharpen focus. At work, this practice keeps you from drowning in office politics. In family life, it helps you respond with patience rather than frustration. In business, it keeps you anchored when markets rise and fall. A single sentence written each morning can redirect the trajectory of your entire day. The second habit is what you might call the delayed response. Epictetus warned against letting others dictate your reactions. He said, "If someone provokes you, remember that it is your opinion that they have insulted you." In modern terms, this is emotional regulation, the ability to pause before reacting. The next time anger flares, when your partner's words sting, when a client tests your patience, when your child pushes too hard, do not speak immediately. Breathe, count, step away if you must. This pause, even if only a few seconds, transforms you from a prisoner of impulse into the master of yourself. Those who expect you to lash out will be disarmed by your composure. That is how a Stoic monster wields power, not by striking wildly, but by holding the sword until the right moment. The third habit is chosen discomfort. Every day, give yourself one small trial. A cold shower, a skipped meal, a difficult workout, even a day without checking your phone. Seneca advised this long ago, telling his students to practice poverty, to dress in rough clothes and eat coarse bread, so that when real hardship came, they would not be broken by it. Modern science calls this hormesis, controlled stress that strengthens the body and mind, and you already know its truth. Growth never comes from ease. In work, in family, in the gym, in life, discipline through discomfort builds resilience. It turns you from fragile into unshakable. Think about what these habits mean in the rhythm of your life. You begin the morning with clarity. You handle conflict with calm. You strengthen yourself with chosen trials. Day after day, these practices accumulate, brick upon brick, until you have built something inside you no one can take away. This is the monster within, not a creature of rage or destruction, but a force of discipline, clarity, and calm power. Others may not understand it. Some may even fear it. But deep down, you will know. You are no longer at the mercy of the world. You are no longer swayed by the noise, the insults, the chaos. You are rooted, like the rock against the waves. And here is the most important truth. Becoming this kind of monster does not distance you from others. It allows you to lead them, to protect them, to inspire them. Your calmness becomes their shelter. Your discipline becomes their example. Your silence in the storm becomes their hope that they too can endure. That is what it means to build your Stoic monster within, to become not destructive, but indestructible. The monster within you. They wanted a monster, but the true monster is not rage. It is calm, not chaos. It is control, not fear. It is freedom. The world expects explosions, tantrums, and weakness. But when you answer with silence, when you master yourself, when you endure what others cannot, you become something far more powerful than they imagined. You become the storm they cannot predict, the rock they cannot move, the spirit they cannot break. This is the paradox of Stoicism. The monster the world fears is not born of fury, but of discipline. It is not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who cannot be shaken. The one who chooses dignity over despair, reason over rage, endurance over surrender. That is the monster within you, waiting to be called forth, not to destroy, but to withstand, to outlast, to rise. If you have felt the pressure of life bearing down, work demanding too much, family tensions pulling you apart, your own thoughts turning against you, then you already know how easy it is to lose control. But here is your chance to step into a new kind of power. Try just one Stoic habit today. Journal your thoughts in the morning. Pause before responding in anger. Or test yourself with a small chosen discomfort. Then share your experience in the comments so that we can walk this path together. And if you are ready to keep building this inner fortress, to keep shaping this unshakable calm, then subscribe to this channel. Together, we can form a community of people who are no longer ruled by fear or fury, but by freedom. As Seneca once wrote, "He who has conquered himself is free." Let that be your final reminder that the monster within you is not your enemy, but your liberation.